Hi. The first item on our preparation list for the assignment is the liaison officer. The liaison officer, well, often the consulting firm doesn't really have a liaison officer. It's usually the chief consultant or senior manager in the consulting firm, him or herself, who liaises with the client company. But it's always very good to have a liaison officer from the organization, the client organization themselves. If there's somebody on their side who you could directly access, it really makes life much easier for the consulting firm. It's very difficult to get hold of senior managers. They're often in meetings, their phones are often off, access to them is often blocked by PAs. So if the client company, and I think this is something that the consulting firm has to negotiate from the onset, is a liaison officer in the organization, somebody accessible, somebody who has the time to talk to you, and somebody who's not that hard to get hold of. That's what I propose. The second issue we tackle here is the recruitment and training of client staff. Now, although you might not be a recruiting firm or recruitment agency, very often the client relies on the consulting firm to assist them in the recruitments. This could be you sitting in an interview or making part of the consulting experts or experts consultants to be part of the selection process, or it could even amount to headhunting. Very often they would make use of a recruitment agency to select the staff for the client company, but they would want the consulting firm to assist in training. For instance, a liaison officer, if there's no such a person and the project is big enough, they might request you to assist them in the recruitment of this. It could also be temporary staff that is jointly the responsibility of both the consulting firm and the client company. So in one way or another, the consulting firm is often involved in the recruitment of competent staff for the client company. Depending on your consulting project, you would need office space. Now, the golden rule for a consulting firm is to keep the variable cost higher than the fixed cost. In other words, you don't want to sit with office space which you're not going to use if there are no consulting projects. The secret here is to try and negotiate client office space. So if the client can give you office space, this would save you quite a bit of money. Otherwise, short-term leases where you could rent office space for a specific period of time. This would be to do interviews, to have processing space, depending on the consulting project, of course. It doesn't make sense to have this as a fixed cost. It would rather make sense to have it as a overhead for the specific project. In other words, the cost for office space will disappear as soon as the project has been completed. To one of the most important parts of the initiation of this project, and that's the briefing of the operating consultant. Now, mostly it would be the senior consultant involved with all the preparatory work. That would be the senior consultant that was involved in the submission of the proposal. So up to this point, the operating consultant, the guy on the ground, the front line who's going to produce your bottom line, has very little knowledge of this project. They probably haven't even heard of this project, and they should probably start next week. So the briefing for the operating consultant is extremely important. Depending on the size of your project, this could be up to 50 consultants or as little as 3. So you need to prepare for the briefing. I've made a couple of checklists which you can go through. Use these checklists. Make sure that you cover every aspect in these checklists. Let's have a look. Your first checklist for the consultant briefing is the project initiation. This is where we start and introduce the project. Firstly, we look at the client's preliminary problem diagnosis and proposal. What are we addressing here? What is it that we're really working with here? And what is it that we must fix? What are the problems? Then we look at internal confidential notes on the client. These could be various. It could be confidential in terms of a trust problem between employees and management. It could even be a corrupt manager that has been fired. So anything that this client would not like other people to know, we look at this, the confidential notes, and the things that are quite private. Then we start looking at the data and the information. We start processing this. Let's look at the stats. Let's get a statistic here on client, on business growth, on employee turnover, customer retention, anything that's necessary for our consulting project. And then we can also look at published or other material or printed matter. Very often in my work, I would like to look at strategy documents. I would like to see what are the objectives, the goals, the mission of this organization, anything that you have at your disposal. So we basically unpack the client here and we introduce the project. Your next checklist contains general information on this project or assignment. Firstly, there's the terms of reference and contract. What exactly are we contracted to do here? By when should this be done? What are our obligations and what are the client's obligations? What is the terms of reference? What are the points of reference? What other reference items are there for us to work on here? What's the history of the client and their background? Where do they come from? Where did they start? Were they a result of a merger acquisition, or was the original startup company? Are the owners still there? Is it now a public company? Let's discuss and unpack them. Your strategy, processes, structure, culture, and systems of the organization. If you understand these things, you truly understand the organization. If there's a problem in the organization, it is either with their strategy, their processes, structure, culture, or systems, one of those things. Generally, the general client perceptions on the assignment and consultants, I often find that many times clients deal with consultants, and then when you come there, they weren't happy with those consultants' work. So there's a bit of a stigma attached to consultants. This is some of the times. There are also times when companies have good experiences with consultants. What are the expected results? When you leave there, what would they like to see different? What needs to happen? The project strategy and plan for the assignment. Let's unpack that and see exactly what's expected of the team. What are the due dates? What are the deadlines? What are the milestones? Project methodology and principles for this assignment. What are the methodology here? For instance, confidentiality could be a principle, which means that we should be extra sensitive when working with client material. Project methodology could entail what type are we going to do, a pure project management methodology here. Logistical, practical, and operational arrangements. This has to do with aeroplane tickets, hotels, office space, the general logistics. Obstacles to effective assignment execution. You could, for instance, find that there are certain people at the top structure who is against this consulting project. Well, that's a big obstacle. Or the client could be located in remote places. So one of the obstacles I often find is that it's almost impossible to get a lot of people together from the company out of their work to interview them or to have a focus group. Benchmarking the assignment. What is your previous experience here? What previous similar projects could we use so that we do not reinvent the wheel? And then, of course, your scheduled reporting and progress control. Very important. The client will not tolerate late reports or late progress reports. Your last checklist relates to the contractual obligations. What are the commitments to the client? Which specific things do you have to do? What are the invoicing and payment arrangements? Who should get what in terms of payment? When do we start? What the time, the place? Where do we end? Logistical arrangements, as previously mentioned. Support arrangements. Liaison, who liaises? How do we communicate to the different stakeholders here? To certain stakeholders we would liaise in terms of emails, others would be reports, others would be face-to-face meetings. And then lastly, the consultant's accommodation, travel and meeting arrangements. Now we work with the client briefing. Why is the client briefing the client briefing after the consultant briefing? Well, obviously you've talked to the clients quite a bit up to this point. Now you're starting with the project. Now the reason we have the client briefing after the operating consultants briefing is because you'll find that when briefing the operating consultants, there's a number of things that you didn't think of. You went for this assignment and you wanted to sort this out as quickly as possible because you're making profits on this. So obviously the senior consultants were driven by the need to get the project, to pocket the project, to make profit on the project. The operating consultants see this differently. They look at it from a more realistic point of view, from a more logistical point of view. So during the briefing of the operating consultants, there's going to be various problems pitching up. And you need to now deal with these. This could be extension of the project duration. It could be things that can't happen right away. There are certain things which you haven't thought about. So now you go back to the client and now you're going to renegotiate a few things on the initial project plan. And that's why the client briefing is just after the operating consultant's briefing, so that you can have a look at things that need to change or need to be amended. Now that the nitty-gritties have been sorted out, the consultant's briefing has been done, the client briefing has been done, there's no more ambiguity about the project plan. We've made all the necessary adjustments and amendments. It's time to introduce the consultants. This is a very important part of the beginning of the project, especially because the operating consultants, a lot of them have never been to the client premises. This negotiations has probably mostly taken place with the senior consultants. So it's a good time for the operating consultants to meet the key people and to also see the environment within which they're going to function. It would be really good if you could organize a tour here, get somebody from the client company to take them around in the buildings. If it's a manufacturing firm, let them walk from wall to wall and see what's happening there. Let them get an inside understanding of the business. So almost like a tour taking place through the premises, explaining what is it that the client company does, who does what, introduce them to middle and junior managers. Your best source in consulting projects is often the supervisors, because they're on the ground and they know what's happening. So go and talk to them. Spend time. I would say in a big project with a big company, take 2 to 3 days to get your consultants nestled in to this new project by understanding the client first. Alright, your preparation has been done. Now it's time to start work. Roll the project plan out, make sure that everybody knows what to do, when to do it, how to do it, on time, on quality, on target, and get the project rolling.